Hey everyone, if you're enjoying my RM audiobooks, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that hype, and maybe check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel even more. Your support means a lot and helps me keep these coming. Now, sit back and enjoy the story.
Notice me, you damn rabbit. Author note. Oh dear lord, this was a mistake. I have no idea why I'm writing this. I blame all the horny authors out there, especially those in the DanMachi fanfic Discord for making me write this blasphemy lol. That, and a really hilarious fanart I found. Premise? Well, this was in response to all the people who say that Bell is nothing more than a simp after Amori released his recent What If story with Ryu. To which I say, who the hell cares? Instead of mocking Bell, we should embrace our inner simp and cherish our favorite waifus and husbandos. So to celebrate, let me indulge you in a tale of 3 other fabulous waifus as they discover their hidden potential and work tirelessly to have their favorite rabbit notice them, damn it. Chapter 1. The simps encounter their husbando. It was supposed to have been a routine mission. A simple expedition to show the new recruits what the dungeon was supposed to be like. Instead, it turned into a nightmare, as she and her party were quickly wounded, exhausted, and about to be surrounded. Laurier wasn't the strongest or the smartest member of Hermes Familia, but she did honest work and wasn't afraid of getting her hands dirty. She specialized in infiltration and espionage, able to extract any kind of vital intel from a conversation without the other party knowing, and even being able to sneak into expensive mansions in the blink of an eye. Though the majority of elves would consider her actions barbaric and unbefitting of her race, Laurier understood the necessity of such skills in a city as dangerous and full of crime and deceit like Oreo. At the very least, she could use her skills to help others. But for all her prowess in crawling through shadows and becoming the invisible spider that stalks her prey, she was still just an average level 2, who found herself caught in a monster party on the 16th floor. She was originally supposed to show a couple of new Familia members the ropes while taking them on a trip to the 18th floor, where she would let them relax while looking for any clues regarding the disappearances of those monsters. It should have been an easy mission for someone like her, who made the trip hundreds of times at this point. But apparently today she inherited some of Asphai's downright atrocious luck, as hordes of minotaurs tore their way through the dungeon walls, chasing her and her group further into the dungeon. Panting, she knelt on the ground, massaging her bruised and likely cracked ribs after she took a club to her chest to protect one of her party members. The 2 new level 1s were behind her, cowering and clutching their weapons to their chests like a lifeline as they hugged the wall behind them. Nearly 20 different minotaurs watched them with salivating and bloodthirsty grins on their faces as they slowly advanced closer and closer, their weapons already dripping with blood from an unlucky fool who encountered them before they did. Laurier grit her teeth and pulled out her sword, ready to lay down her life to protect her junior members. It may not have been how she envisioned the way her life would end, but she would do whatever it took to make sure her party would be able to escape. Trying to escape to the floors above would be a death sentence, but thankfully the people in Rivera had taken out the Goliath only a week prior, so if she bought them enough time they could run and escape to the 18th floor. One of the minotaurs advanced, and Laurier swung her sword, chopping off one of its legs. "Run!" she shouted, pulling out her magic sword and launching a spell that created a gap in the horde, allowing her 2 followers to make a beeline for the 17th floor. Not even the minotaurs would follow them through there, but with that last attack her magic sword shattered into pieces, and her mind was nearly depleted. She barely had the strength to even raise her sword arm a few inches into the air, and now the minotaurs knew it. With bloodthirsty smirks, they advanced, ready to tear the helpless elf limb from limb. Laurier closed her eyes, ready to face the end with the dignity of a proud elf. And not a moment too soon, a white whirlwind came to her rescue. HAA. The minotaurs found themselves turned into minced meat as a young man dashed into the crowd, using twin knives to slice the monsters into pieces. With speed and dexterity easily surpassing that of what a brand new level 2 was capable of, the boy swiftly dispatched them, leaving nothing but carnage in his wake. "Oh, thank goodness I made it in time. Are you okay, miss?" Laurier opened her eyes and saw the universe ablaze in all its glory. Or rather, the very center of her universe stood in front of her. Hair as pure white as snow, a youthful face that begged to be touched and licked. Wait, what? Red eyes as radiant as rubies, and arms just itching to envelop her in his warmth. The young man in front of her completely captured her attention, outshining even the sun in his brilliance. Her heart sped up 1,000 beats a minute, her breaths grew deep and labored, her eyes dilated to the max, and embarrassingly, her underwear was utterly soaked and ruined. But Laurier could hardly care less. She quickly recognized her savior, Bell Cranel, the little rookie and the record breaker. A brand new adventurer who smashed through Ace Wallenstein's record by reaching level 2 in a month, and whom also greatly captured the attention of her god. And by the gods, was he so handsome. Laurier could feel drool dribbling down the sides of her mouth as she took in his utter perfection. He was everything she could ever ask for in a male, kind, strong, and somehow both dashing and adorable at the same time. The more she digested his disheveled appearance, soaking up the succulent smell of his sweat through her nose, the more she felt her body lose control. Goosebumps ran all across her skin. Her nipples could now cut straight through adamantite, and her panties were now nothing more than a wet napkin. If she didn't do something soon, she'd make a massive puddle right under her feet. She had to escape. But a part of her, really, all of her, wanted nothing more than to pounce on the delectable rabbit in front of her and devour him whole. To make them completely and utterly inseparable. To have him bury himself so deeply within her that he would never be able to move an inch away from her body for the rest of his life. And with that scary thought passing through her head, Laurier was wrenched from her fantasies. She squealed in fear, or was it delight, and ran straight past her savior, running all the way up the dungeon to the outside world, completely forgetting about the comrades she saved down in the 18th floor. Slaughtering any and all monsters in her path, Laurier struggled to rein in the raging hormones cascading down her body, trying her hardest to not imagine Bell Cranel's delicious body as she ran towards the surface. Well, the good news is that the rest of your party made it back safe and sound, but I'm honestly quite surprised with you, Laurier. It isn't like you to suddenly take off running like that. Or, destroying the showers the moment you made it back home. Laurier tried her hardest to fight down the blush threatening to blossom in her cheeks, as both her captain, Asfi, and her god stared at her in incredulity. Her return to the Hermes Familia home had been less than peaceful. Despite all her efforts, she just couldn't push the thought of Bell Cranel out of her mind. Her heart practically filled to bursting with love and lust for the little rookie. Eventually, her lust reached an all-time peak, and in a fit of elven fury, or depravity, she stormed into the ladies' bathing area, kicked everyone out on their butts, locked herself in, and proceeded to disrobe and utterly destroy the entire bathroom as she rolled around in ecstasy, chanting Bell Cranel's name as if each syllable could extend her life. Thankfully, everyone had swiftly ran away from the scene the moment she was set loose, so no one had any idea why she reacted the way she did. Laurier would have buried herself alive in shame if her familia discovered she destroyed the baths in an episode of orgasmic delight. And to her relief, her party members returned completely safe and sound thanks to Bell rescuing them and sending them back up. Oh, had she known, she would have jumped him then and there and sucked his soul right out of his tasty mouth. And she'd definitely suck out more than his soul. Laurier slapped her cheeks as Hermes and Asfi stared at her in worry. No. Bad brain. Must think of pure thoughts. Think of the great elven tree. Make your spirit and mind be as sturdy and strong as the great tree's trunk. And maybe little rookie's trunk would be just as sturdy as… Laurier? You're drooling. Laurier twitched as Asfi wiped the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief. Hermes could only scratch his head in confusion. Laurier was definitely acting more strange than usual. Well, in any case, why not have me update your fauna? I'm sure you accumulated some good excelia after your encounter in the dungeon. Asfi politely turned away as Laurier lowered her dress, allowing Hermes to access her fauna. Plucking his finger with a needle, a drop of his blood fell on her back, allowing her fauna to glow with the insignia of her familia. Eh? Hermes let out a tiny squeak, briefly jotting down Laurier's fauna before swiftly passing out. Lord Hermes. What happened? Asfi grabbed Laurier's status sheet, reading down the paper before her eyes honed in on the very bottom. At that very moment, her glasses shattered, her face lost all its color, and she too passed out, falling to the floor and frothing at the mouth. Is it really that bad? Laurier reached down and grabbed her status sheet. Giving it a read, she was surprised by the rather large increase in her status, advancing far more than she even thought possible, despite having been a level 2 for over 3 years now. That can't be right. I didn't really do anything great, and little rookie had to come save me. So why? And that was when she looked down at the bottom of the paper, where a brand new skill made itself known to her. And when she finished reading her skill, Laurier could feel her smile stretching across her face as naughty thoughts ran rampant in her mind. Oh my. I knew it. This is true love. She let out a triumphant shout, giggling madly as she jumped up and down in joy, before she took in a deep gulp of air and screamed to the heavens. Bell Cranel, I will make you mine. Elsewhere. Lafia? You okay over there? Said elf was stewing in her seat, completely ignoring her food in front of her as literal smoke bellowed from her ears. Glaring at her breakfast as if it personally murdered her friends and family in front of her eyes, Lafia's expression practically traumatized most of Loki Familia as they passed her by. Aze, Tioni, Tiona, Elfie, and Aki all looked on with worry as she continued to grumble darkly in her seat, her murderous expression still present even after breakfast had ended. Lafia, you all right? You look like you want to murder someone. Did something happen during our expedition? Oh. Or are you feeling grumpy because you didn't get to level up yet? Tiona said, lightly poking Lafia's cheek. It had been a few days after they had returned from their expedition to the 59th floor, and it was a cause for celebration for the entire familia. Tiona, and Bet had leveled up, And even Lafia herself could become a level 4 at any moment if she so chooses, only abstaining so she could raise her magic to S rank. But that wasn't what was troubling her. Instead, her thoughts were preoccupied by what happened right before they all left for the surface. When she had gone on another adventure on the 18th floor, fighting alongside someone who she once viewed as nothing more than a pest. Bell Cranel, the mysterious young man who somehow monopolized A's attention, broke her record, and even peeped on her in all her naked glory. He was a pervert of the highest degree, a true lowlife, a lecher who sucked girls dry and defiled their pure bodies. He took and took, leaving nothing but pain and misery in his wake. Lafia knew the moment she met him that she would despise him till the end of her days. That was, until they fought together against the mysterious monster of Evelus on the 18th floor. And right then and there, her attitude towards him had taken a massive U-turn. Suddenly, her previous agitation towards him had mysteriously vanished. She was no longer angry at him for peeping on her idol and crush. In fact, thinking about that incident again only made her feel one thing and one thing alone: jealousy. And the scary part was, it wasn't Belle she was jealous of. Her thoughts were sent into turmoil as the reality of the situation settled in her mind. Rather than feeling disgust and hatred for the rabbit, her heart now lamented that Belle hadn't peeped on her instead. Miss A's? Who cared about him peeping on her? It should have been me, not her. And that realization sickened her to her stomach. Lafia shook her head wildly with a growl, startling her friends around her. This shouldn't make any sense. Why on earth would she feel this way towards her rival? Since when did his ugly rabbit features start making her heart beat rapidly? Since when did the sight of his bare chest, shown to her when she washed his shirt after tripping and spilling food all over it, excite her so much down below? And since when did that smile of his cause so much warmth in her chest and face? It all started with that smile. That damn smile. Greya. Lafia screamed, nearly causing the others to back away slowly from her as she stood up and ran to Loki. Since when did she start falling for Bell Cranel? This had to be a curse of some kind. Or some sick, twisted magic he used on her to make her feel this way. It was the only reason that made sense. Her feelings for A's or Philvis shouldn't have disappeared so suddenly like that. It didn't make sense for her to get a massive thrill whenever she recalled how he heroically saved her from that monster, or how she reveled in how his hand had dipped so close to her breasts. She had to get to the bottom of this problem, stat. There was absolutely no way she fell in love with Bell Cranel. Loki. Update my Falna now. Lafia roared, slamming the door to her goddess's office wide open. Loki had an entire pitcher of soma spill all over her body as she violently jerked in shock from the sudden visit. Normally, she'd have kicked up a hissy fit for having someone waste all her precious soma. It was the last one she had, but the downright bloodthirsty expression on Lafia's face quickly shut those feelings down. If she didn't do as she said, she had a feeling that she'd be sent straight to heaven faster than she could say boobs. Hey, are you sure? Didn't I just update your status a couple of days ago, EP? Loki flinched as Lafia pulled out a dagger from her person and stabbed into the area right in front of her god's crotch. Update. Falna. Now. Lafia roared, already pulling her dress down and presenting her back. Had the circumstances been different, Loki would have tried to cop a feel of Lafia's growing chest, but she valued her life far more at the moment. Quickly pricking her finger, she accessed Lafia's Falna. Look, see? Nothing new so far, all your stats remain the same, and, wait. What the absolute flying fuck is that? Lafia only gave Loki 2 seconds to write her status down before she shoved her god aside and quickly read through the paper, before her eyes shot wide open in horror as she read the bottom of the page. No. No. Loki made her way to the door, already ready to bolt the moment things went south. And now look, Lafia. This isn't a bad thing. I mean, the skill, has its perks. Hey, and you are at that age after all. It's perfectly normal to fall in. When Lafia raised her head up, Loki immediately ran from her office and fled for her life. Just in time too, as her entire office lit up in a blue glow, before the entire room exploded. I am not in love with Bell Cranel. Somewhere in the dining room, Finn felt his thumb violently twitch, before suddenly snapping in two. Well, that's not good. He muttered, staring in puzzlement at his now mutilated thumb. And that was when he heard the scream. Gareth grabbed an entire barrel of beer and guzzled it down in one go, while Riveria felt a massive headache coming up. What on earth did she do now? Also elsewhere. Horn felt her body twitch violently, sweat pouring down her skin as she tossed and turned on her bed. Her goddess Freya had taken to bell watching again, and sadly for the poor girl, it was one of those days. Immense waves of pleasure blossomed across her body and soul, making her hips bounce up and down as the throes of her orgasm cascaded in waves. Unfortunately, whenever Freya was in one of her moods, it would take an entire day for her to settle down, and so Horn barricaded herself in her room and cupped her hand to her mouth, praying that no one could hear her moans as she found herself locked in another spiral of ecstasy. Due to her unique magic, Horn had the power to temporarily become Freya, taking on her appearance, voice, and even some parts of her arcanum. She would essentially become Freya's double, sharing all of her thoughts and sensations as if the two were one and the same. At first, Horn had been ecstatic to learn that she gained such a magic in the first place. When Freya found her all those years ago, she had sworn then and there that she would be by her goddess's side for all eternity, her mortal body be damned. She would do whatever it takes to be just like her, a goddess truly worthy of worship. But then everything changed when he appeared. Horn had grown to despise the mere existence of Bell Cranel. He was a blight, a parasite that wore down all of Freya's best qualities, reducing her to nothing more than a young maiden. And worst of all, Freya loved him even more for it. And to call it love was a massive understatement. Freya lived and breathed for Bell Cranel alone. If he asked her to give him the world, she would charm all of existence if it meant he would be by her side. And the more Bell grew stronger, the more he grew to be a hero, the deeper Freya fell for him. Freya's love for Bell Cranel was a black hole, one that swallowed everything around it and left nothing behind. She desired him, yearned for him, lusted for him with a passion no mortal or god could match. And when her desire for him reached a certain peak, she surrendered herself to pleasure, doing whatever it took to satiate her infinite desire. And since Horn shared all of her goddess's sensations, Horn fought down another loud moan as her body nearly twisted backwards in on itself. She soon felt another tsunami of desire flood her loins once more, her entire bed now utterly drenched in her nectar. She could only let out a pitiful sound as the onslaught of orgasms continued to build up inside her, her connection to her goddess leaving her helpless as her body, mind, and soul were wrapped in the spell that was Bell Cranel. Little rookie, I swear I will murder you. I will tear you limb by limb. I will rip the flesh from your bones and smash your lecherous brain and heart into paste. I will force feed you your own intestines. And when I get my hands on your rotting body, I will ride you to death and drink your blood and sperm straight from your dash. Horn's thoughts were interrupted as another orgasm, this one far more powerful than her previous ones, sent tingles up her spine, making her fall from her bed and onto the floor, spasming nonstop. Goddess, why? Why must you torture me like so? Horn thought dejectedly, resigning herself to a nightmare filled with pleasure. It was already the next morning by the time Horn's descent into hell, or heaven, finally abetted. With weak, twitching arms, she raised herself from the floor, brushing her sopping wet hair from her forehead. Her room was in complete disarray, her blankets, clothes, and sheets all tossed to the floor. The entire bedroom stank of her musk, and her nightdress was utterly soaked in sweat and her fluids. She took in the depraved sight with horror, her hatred for Bell Cranel reaching an all-time high. Grr. I look like one of those whores from the pleasure district. Damn you, Bell Cranel. Horn wanted nothing more than to strip the skin and muscles from that rabbit skeleton, but paradoxically a part of her also wanted to milk him dry until he screamed her name, pledging his soul to her and her alone. She froze as the realization sunk in. Despite her hatred for the boy, she knew that he was ultimately Lady Freya's destined otter. She would do whatever it took to make sure that Lady Freya was satisfied, even if it meant making sure Bell Cranel fell for Seer. So why was it that she fantasized about Bell screaming and moaning her name, not Seer's or Freya's? His cute but punchable face, twisted in pleasure and pain as he shouted Horn at the top of his lungs. Could this be a product of her magic, her connection with Freya making her fall in love with Bell Cranel by proxy? Or did she actually fall in love with him? So unsettled by this thought, Horn rushed out of her room, running straight to Lady Freya's office. It was at this moment that she nearly ran into Hythe, the Familia's healer. Ah. Hythe took one look at Horn's disheveled appearance, her soaking wet dress, her messy hair, and then wrinkled her nose in disgust as the smell of sex wafted towards her. You will never speak a word of this to anyone. Horn knew that her threat was moot, as Hythe was a level 4 and a seasoned combatant, far stronger than her level 2 self, but she prayed that Hythe would take pity on her and not ask any questions. Thankfully, she nodded slowly and backed out of the way, letting her through. Horn let out a sigh of relief as she passed her by, but not until Hythe let out a few choice words. Next time you want to flick the bean, make sure you clean yourself up afterwards. You really stink. Horn could only turn bright red in utter shame as she ran from the spot. After washing herself nonstop for a good 3 hours, Horn finally made her way to her goddess's quarters. Opening the door, she was relieved to see that Otter wasn't by Lady Freya's side, as what she wanted to discuss was absolutely not for his eyes and ears to witness. Lady Freya lounged on her chair, her face still smiling in bliss as she cradled a massive body pillow with an image of Bell in her arms, her hips gyrating back and forth as she tried to wrench just a little more pleasure from her fantasies. Lady Freya, are you free? I was wondering if you could update my status. She asked, praying that her goddess wouldn't partake in another marathon of pleasure. How strange, you almost never asked for a status update. Not since you first became a level 2 all those years ago. Freya pondered, thankfully moving her Bell body pillow to the side. Horn let out a relieved sigh and removed her dress, letting her goddess spill a drop of her sacred blood on her back. Her fauna lit up, illuminating the room with the glow of the Valkyrie on her back. Lady Freya lazily wrote down her status, before letting out a surprised gasp once she reached the bottom. Goddess? Horn asked hesitantly, suddenly feeling a sense of foreboding anger from her patron due to her magic. Horn. Freya said in a menacing tone. Eep. Why yes, my goddess? Have I upset you? You know I want Bell Cranel, correct? Horn nodded rapidly. And you know that I will stop at nothing to make him mind, correct? Why yes, absolutely. Then, do you mind explaining this to me? Freya gave her status sheet, a very pissed-off expression plastered on her face, and Horn grabbed it with shaking hands. Looking down, she noticed a surprising increase to all her stats, despite never having fought in a long time. And then she reached the bottom. Horn's heart stopped beating. Well, Freya said impatiently, her foot tapping the floor repeatedly. Horn let out a diminutive scream, one that echoed across the entirety of Folkvanger. For the first time since the Familia's inception, the baptisms of combat held outside were interrupted, as everyone including the executives looked up to the tower in shock and horror, startled by the blood-curdling cries of horror. Meanwhile, in Hestia Familia's decrepit church. Eep. HM? What's wrong, Master Bell? You okay, Bell? You look like you've seen a ghost. Bell had been eating breakfast alongside Lily and Hestia when he suddenly shivered, his skin turning a deathly pale color. I feel like something bad is about to happen to me, goddess. Bell said in horror. Both girls turned to each other in confusion, surprised by his ominous premonition. Master Bell, did you have a nightmare or something? No, wait a minute. I sense a disturbance in the air. As if a bunch of horny girls are trying to reach out to MY Bell at once. Goddess Hestia, you really need to stop eating Jagamarukan. Lily shook her head, not even bothering to entertain the bust to God. Bell swallowed his breakfast heavily, the bad feeling he had earlier still sitting at the back of his mind. For some reason, he felt like he had unwittingly unleashed a pack of ravenous beasts after him. Laurier Swall. Level 2. STR, D253. Ind, E470. Dex, C343. AGEI, C400. Mag, B200. Skill, Lustful Yearning. Perpetual heat user gains increased excelia and rapid growth based on the user's lustful desires and devotion to her soulmate. Increased sexual desires and devotion will cause increased growth. Magic, Elven Shadow. Stalker's persistence allows the user to turn invisible upon chant. User will be unable to be detected by sight, sound, touch, or audio while spell is in effect. Lafia Vortis. Level 3. STR, I86. Ind, H184. Dex, G210. AGI, G271. Mag, B797. Mage, H. Abnormal Resistance, I. Magic. Arc's Ray. Fusillade Philerica. Elf Ring. Skill, Tsundere's Dilemma. Denial of inner voice. User gains increased excelia and rapid growth based on the user's denial of their desires and love towards their soulmate. Increased denial of the user's true feelings will cause increased growth. Horn. Level 2. STR, H122. Ind, I94. Dex, G227. IGEI, H180. Mag, S998. Sacred Treasure, D. Magic, Vanasith. Skills. Deai Carta. Vonita Shoal. Yandere's Twisted Desires. Intertwining love and hate. User gains increased excelia and rapid growth based on the user's desires, love, and hatred for their soulmate. Increased feelings of love, lust, and hatred will cause increased growth. Author note. Well, that just happened. Been having some writer's block with my other DanMachi stories, so I wrote this in a couple of hours lol. My aim was that if I wrote something really stupid then a eureka moment will come up eventually. Did it succeed? Nope. But hey, this was just a dumb little side project I came up with on the sly. No idea if I will continue this or not. If this gets enough attention then maybe I'll continue it, and if not? Oh, well. By the way, for some reason Laurier and Horn aren't listed as character choices for the story's pairing options, so apologies for their absence. Anyways, hope you found some enjoyment from this dumpster fire of a fanfic. If enough people like this, then we'll continue our adventure as our newly christened simps march forth, eagerly looking for their husbando. One will lust after him, more thirsty than a dying man in a desert. Another will constantly deny her feelings, confusing everyone around her. And the third will feel both unhinged lust and hate towards her beloved, wishing him death and eternal orgasmic pleasure. Who will win in this clash of wills? And will poor Bell survive this onslaught? Or will he succumb to the temptation of 3 extremely thirsty waifus? Author note. What the hell? I fully expected this story to flop, and instead you guys make it blow up practically overnight. Is this story really that entertaining? Or are you just in it for Laurier, Lafia, and Horn? Not that I blame you. They're all underrated waifus. Oh, well, as agreed, since the first chapter did well, I'll be continuing this story. Bear in mind though, comedy is not my forte, so I do apologize if this story does appear stale due to my lack of experience writing humor. I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have on writing comedy, since this story will focus mainly on that, with a slight sprinkle of seriousness here and there. Regardless, I do appreciate all the love you guys have for this story, even if it started out as just a one-shot crack FIC. Chapter 2. Horn's no good. Very bad day. Master Bell, are you okay? You seem really tense. Like a rabbit that's about to get eaten by a pack of wolves. Elf, please stop comparing me to rabbits. Bell squeaked. Why did he always have to be called that? But Sir Bell, you've been moving your head back and forth like you're expecting to be ambushed by someone. We're just in the middle of the street. Makoto pondered. The four of them were walking down the main street towards Babel for a routine trip to the dungeon. Makoto had volunteered to join them, partly as recompense for her familia's actions in the past parade, and they all set out to hopefully gather some money for a nice celebration after their adventure on the 18th floor. And yet, Bell kept on wandering his eyes all across the city as they walked, his hair standing on end as a familiar sensation creeped up his neck. It's just that. I have this funny feeling that I'm being watched by someone. Or like someone's following us. Welf, Lily, and Makoto could only respond with puzzled looks. But who'd want to follow us in the first place? Nobody should even know what happened on the 18th floor since the guild put that gag order, and the only ones who saw us were from Loki and Hermes Familia. Welf pondered. And who'd want to rob a party like us anyways? Master Bell is probably just stressed out since that incident. Lily offered. Bell let out a hesitant laugh. While he understood the rationale, he still trusted his instincts, and something was screaming at him from the back of his head, warning him of danger. But whoever was giving him the stink eye didn't make themselves known, and so the party continued their walk towards Babel. And as they stopped by the central fountain, he finally spotted his stalker. A young woman a few years older than him, with hair as gray as overcast skies and matching eyes, dressed in a bright white dress patterned with flowers, and carrying a basket of food in one arm and a bouquet of flowers in another. She would have made for a beautiful sight, the epitome of a pretty village girl, if it weren't for the murderous glare etched on her face. Bell felt a shiver run up his spine as the mysterious girl stood in front of him and his party. Hands and arms trembling, she turned her face downward, teeth bared like a wild animal forced to restrain itself from mauling its prey. Behind him, Welf, Lily, and Makoto stared at her with confusion while he tried to make sense of the rather paradoxical figure in front of him. You, miss? Do you need something from us? The girl clenched her teeth even harder, the basket of food and bouquet of roses falling to the ground. You. Me. Hate you. The girl muttered quietly. When she raised her head, Bell felt his soul nearly escape his body. If looks could kill, then even his ancestors would have turned in their graves. I hate you. With a mighty roar, the girl pulled out a long dagger from her back and instantly ran towards him. Welf and the others quickly pulled out their weapons, but she was too close to Bell for them to stop her in time. And as for Bell, he was so shocked by the sudden assault that he wasn't even able to react. I'm going to dash. The girl roared as she lunged at him, about to thrust her dagger into his chest. But, oh, no you don't. And just as suddenly, the girl suddenly twitched, dropping her dagger to the ground and colliding into Bell, sending them both tumbling to the ground in a dusty heap. Bell. Master Bell. Sir Bell. The three quickly recovered and made their way to their friend, only to stop suddenly in their tracks as the most ridiculous sight appeared before their eyes. Bell's would-be attacker had tightly draped herself on top of his body, her legs wrapped around his thigh, arms curled around his chest, and her head buried in the crook of his neck. She trembled in his arms, her entire body vibrating in place, and Bell couldn't help but notice how she erratically rubbed her crotch incessantly against his pants, all while he could hear her hastily muffled gasps and moans in his ear. You, miss? Seeking you let go of me? Bell uttered into her ear. Sadly, his voice seemed to have the complete opposite effect, the girl twitching even more and hugging him tighter to her body. With an exasperated glance towards his party, who could only look on in confusion at the once murderous girl now clutching him like a lifeline, Bell could only maneuver his arms between the two to try and push her off, not knowing of the intense battle being waged in his assailant's mind. Goddess, why? Why must you torture me so? Horn thought dejectedly, humiliated beyond belief as she lay in the throes of pleasure once again. Another wave of carnal ecstasy flowed down her spine and straight to her loins, causing her to buck her crotch fervently into Bell Cranel's thigh. Even worse, with her head nestled between his shoulder and neck, she was completely defenseless against his scent. A combination of his sweat and natural pheromones that tore down the literal floodgates inside her quivering flower and caused her stark white dress to turn soggy with her love. It didn't help that she quickly grew more and more addicted to his musk, her nose greedily inhaling every particle of air like a shark hunting for its prey. Biting down on his shirt in a desperate attempt to control herself, Horn closed her eyes and prayed that her goddess would free her from her torment. Sadly, Freya was not in a forgiving mood. Sitting on her lavish seat in her reserved room at Babel, Freya looked on with her divine gaze, cradling a cup of wine with one hand, and thrusting her fingers deep into her velvety depths with the other. Though her cheeks were flushed with arousal, her eyes held no sympathy for her wayward attendant, having seen and felt the contradictory emotions coursing through her mind and groin. Don't think I didn't suspect what you were trying to do, Horn. Freya muttered, increasing the pace of her fingering and using her other hand to now grope her breast. You will follow through with the plan, or things will be very unpleasant. Or should I say, too pleasant. Flashback. Horn had never felt more dejected and ashamed of herself than she had at this moment, prostrating herself in front of her beloved goddess, carrying her newly updated status sheet in her hand and looking as if she would snap her neck at a moment's notice. Her worst fears had been realized. In a cruel twist of fate, she had indeed fallen in love with Bell Cranel, her goddess's beloved. Through their shared connection, she felt every bit of love and lust Freya had for her otter, and the more she interacted with him as seer, the more she found herself falling deeper and deeper into blissful joy. Horn knew that whatever emotions she felt for the boy were nothing more than mere imitations of her goddess's feelings, nothing more. Her magic let her and Freya share a body, mind, and heart, and whatever Freya felt, she felt, and vice versa. This arrangement didn't trouble her in the slightest. All she wanted was to become just like Freya, the sublime goddess who saved her and gave her a new name and life, and when she received her magic, it was like a dream come true. She could become Freya herself. She could feel everything she felt, see and touch everything she did. And if Freya had to feel her emotions too? Even better. For her goddess should experience nothing more than her infinite devotion to her every whim. Otter and the others could rot for all she cared. Let them beat the shit out of each other and act like complete morons. Freya only needed her, and only her. It was a beautiful arrangement, one that would have made her life meaningful. Until he came. It started with one powerful orgasm, one that made her buckle and nearly moan out loud in front of the rest of the executives as they gathered for a meeting. Before Otter, or heavens forbid, Alan could figure out what was wrong with her, she quickly ran from the conference room and barricaded herself before she felt the dry desert that was her vagina suddenly experience a heavy monsoon season. Panties soaked, she gasped in horror as pleasure washed down her body like an avalanche, her thoughts suddenly awash with images of a harmless white-haired adventurer. After a thorough bath, she could only shiver in horror at the onslaught of pleasure she felt. Sure, as a goddess of beauty as well as love and war, Horn was no stranger to Freya's sudden lustful mood swings. Every now and then she would charm the pants out of some poor mortal or god, and as a consequence of her magic, she felt every single bit of pleasure her goddess felt. It was an unforeseen consequence of her deal with Freya, but it was something she would eventually tune out and ignore. Those bouts of sexual frenzy Freya would indulge in were few and far between, and they almost never last long. And it had been months since Freya last lusted after someone, the most recent being when she seduced a desert princess to her bed for a night, before sending her executives to win against an army of 40,000. At first, she chalked it up to another one of Freya's fits, no doubt driven by her failure to convert that desert princess into a member of her familia. But then as the days passed, more and more visions of that same white-haired rabbit showed up in her mind as well. And with it came. Horn had been cutting vegetables in the kitchen when the orgasm struck, and she nearly blew up the giant cauldron of stew by accident. Thankfully, she managed to wrestle control of herself before she could accidentally piss off Hythe, and she ran off from the kitchen straight to her room to quietly moan in ecstasy. Though she had a hard time explaining to the maids why there were several puddles of a clear, sticky fluid leading from the kitchens to her room. And a few days later, when she was instructing the maids on how to best prepare Freya's dress for the upcoming Donatus, another wave of powerful orgasms rocked her very beings, this time occurring so suddenly that she was unable to stop herself from moaning loudly like a hyena in heat. She could only weakly level a glare at the thoroughly embarrassed maids before she ran off to her room, the scene of that same boy accepting a home-cooked meal replaying in her mind. Again and again, the orgasms continued. Again and again, Horn found herself succumbing to pleasure as her mind and heart were flooded with nothing but Bell Cranel. The only times where she found any respite were the days where Freya acted as seer, and only for a few hours could she find some sense of normalcy before Bell Cranel eventually showed up to accept a meal from her, making her once again collapse from ecstasy. And when Bell Cranel defeated the Minotaur at level 1. When Lady Freya witnessed his first steps as a hero. Well, the maids would later that day gossip about how Horn's room stank like a fish market on a sweltering sunny afternoon. Day in, day out, her mind was filled with Bell Cranel. Every breath she took in brought Bell Cranel's scent down her nostrils. Every meal she ate made her yearn for the taste of Bell Cranel's flesh, especially his thick, whipped cream. Every dream she had featured Bell Cranel, looking sexier than ever as he beckoned her to their shared bed. Horn was trapped in a purgatory of carnal pleasure. Freya had grown to love the boy so deeply that every fiber of her being thirsted for him. If Freya was the sun, and Horn the planet that circled her, Bell Cranel was the black hole that sucked them in and made them orbit around him. And she couldn't fathom why. This went above and beyond any desires Freya had in the past. Even Ollie didn't make her want to flood Oreo in her creamy love. There was something about Bell that made Freya desire him on a level indescribable even to the gods. And to her horror, she found herself yearning for him as well. Her dreams twisted, changed like a mold of clay. Where in her past fantasies Freya was the one being manhandled and succumbing to pleasure, it was now Horn taking her place, squirming in place as Bell whispered sweet words of love and affection into her ear. Where Bell had massaged and touched Freya to her heart's content, he now gently caressed Horn's curves, gently cupping her breasts and kneading them like dough. Where Bell had Freya sink to her knees as he brushed his fingers over her bright red button, he now carried Horn to their shared bed, with her watching with bated breath as he tenderly removed her underwear and kissed her thighs, inching closer and closer to her virginal flower before extending his tongue and then. It was madness. Blasphemy. A cardinal sin. Horn had dedicated her very soul to the goddess, and yet as the days passed she found herself yearning more and more for that sinful rabbit who led Freya astray. The more Bell Cranel interacted with Freya, the more she turned into a girly girl who couldn't turn off the faucet in her quivering cooch. And the more she felt his love through Freya, the more she yearned for it too. Oh, the days when she would touch herself in her sleep, wanting nothing more than for that beautiful boy to cradle her. Oh, how she wanted to chew and suckle on his flesh till he was a dried-up pulp, to take his length and suck his very soul out of him. And the more she yearned for him, the more she hated him. This was not natural. She was supposed to be a pure maiden dedicated to Freya and Freya alone. Not some troglodyte of an adventurer too meek to stand up for himself, and too much of a dunderhead to completely miss Seer's attempts at seduction. She hated Bell Cranel. She loved Bell Cranel. And she couldn't decide which side of her would prevail. Was the love she held for Bell even her own feelings? Or were they merely pitiful reflections of her goddesses? If she cut Bell Cranel from her life, would she finally get rid of him and these damnable feelings? Would Freya finally act like a goddess again? Luckily for her, it was these contradictory feelings constantly battling each other in her heart that made Freya spare her in the end. As a goddess capable of seeing the color of people's souls, all she could see deep inside Horn's very being was a vortex of black and white. Different shades of darkness and light spinning and clashing together in an orgy of chaos. Freya found herself fascinated by the sight, surprised at how radically the soul of her most loyal attendant had changed in such a short amount of time. Had the circumstances been different, she might have praised her introverted follower, but now? She was only a hair trigger away from summoning Alan and ordering him to take out the trash. Well, Freya barked, waving Horn's status sheet in front of her. Care to explain this? Why you developed a skill based on your love for M.Y. Otter? Gee goddess, I can explain. Horn yelped. I swear on my name that I don't love him. A lie. And yet, not a lie. Freya felt a headache coming as a sentence laden with contradictions graced her ears. Paradoxically, Horn was both lying and telling the truth to her, not a single falsehood present in her words, even though her skills said otherwise. In fact, let me prove my worth to you. I can make it so that he'll pay attention to you. I can seduce him to you. Make him stop thirsting after that sword princess. Horn begged. The sword princess. Just that title alone made Freya want to throw up. When she first met the girl nearly a decade ago, she quickly lost interest in her despite Loki's affections. After all, what was interesting about a girl who diddled herself to killing monsters? She would have thought her as bad as Otter and Alan, but at least those two didn't have the personality of a rock. If Ace Wallenstein wanted to talk, she talked with the mindset of a child and the charm of a lobotomized troll. She was just bland. Boring. The only good part about her being her looks, which many other women easily matched or surpassed. How typical of Loki, only caring about the outside and choosing mortals of questionable character on the inside. And yet, that potato snack-obsessed boulder managed to completely and utterly ensnare her beloved Odd right under her very nose. Oh, how she wanted to tie cinder blocks to that half-spirit's feet and chuck her into a lake. The girl beat Bell half to death, all to just give him a lap pillow. And it was so obvious that she had ulterior motives behind her actions. And Bell's reward for wanting her affections? Getting the daylights kicked out of him for nearly a week. If that was the kind of training he needed, then she would have brought him to her manor and have the city's strongest adventurer give him some good training, where she would then nurture him in her bosom, no strings attached. All the lap pillows he could ever ask for. Seriously. Out of all the women he had to fall in love with, why her? There were so many better options out there. Take her best friend for example. She's a natural blonde, is way cuter, is much more mature, and has the most luscious thighs out of any other mortal woman in all of Oreo. Oh, if she didn't respect her so much, then she would have dragged her to bed and made her see stardust. At the hostess of fertility, Ryu suddenly sneezed, before instinctively closing her legs as she dressed for work. What's wrong with you today? Lunwar asked, noticing her odd behavior. I bet someone was talking about her luscious thighs again. Naya. Chloe said jokingly, drawing a flushed glare from the elf. Chloe. That is highly inappropriate. Ryu stammered. And I don't have luscious thighs. But what about that weirdo customer we kicked out the other day, Naya? Anya responded. The one who wanted to write a Niavel about how amazing your thighs were. Naya? That man was a pervert of the highest degree and shouldn't be taken seriously in the slightest. Ryu yelped. Don't copy his behavior. But even Seer agreed with thighs are to die for. Lunwar admitted with a shrug. Speaking of Seer, where is she? Off playing hooky again. Naya. Said something about people watching again, whatever that means, Naya. Pushing her thoughts aside, Freya hummed in annoyance at the literal boulder blocking her path to taking Bell Cranel's virginity. Unfortunately, Ace Wallenstein was strong, and her good looks and familia were enough to make her hesitate in getting rid of her. Sure, she could simply ask Alan to kill her, but then not only would Loki get pissed, but Bell would also be sad, and she can't have that. A happy rabbit hubby makes for a happy husband, and a better chance of bringing Ryu to their bed. But if Bell was successfully seduced away from Ace Wallenstein. Sadly, Seer wasn't having much success in getting Bell turned on, and with how much Ishtar has been watching her every move, she couldn't just swoop in and charm his pants off as her goddess self. And it seemed that Bell just didn't prefer goddesses. To completely ignore Hestia's chest like that either took a Herculean effort or a complete lack of interest on his part. And as amusing as it would be to try and make Ryu seduce Bell, the poor elf was even more sheltered than him, and would probably spend months or even years just to bring him into a forest to confess her love under the light of the full moon. How utterly boring. Freya wanted her rabbit, she wanted her rabbit's carrot thrusting into her caverns, and she wanted it now. And taking a look at Horn, she could see the roots of an idea taking shape. If you took away the ugly perpetual scowl off her face, Horn had an admittedly curvy figure, with ample breasts, a full ass, and wide hips. Sure, her personality could use a lot of work, but if she was serious about this plan of hers, then that was Horn's issue to fix. All she needed to do was to seduce Bell Cranel and convince him that the Sword Princess was a poor choice as his wife. And eventually, she'll reward Horn for her efforts by praising her efforts and letting her carry Bell's child while she, Ryu, and Bell tossed and turned in their shared bed, a ball of sweaty limbs as they shared their love and fluids together. Ignoring Horn's tortured expression as she found herself turned on by the scenario, she took one final look at the status sheet and the miraculous skill at the bottom. Freya would be lying if she said she wasn't the least bit curious about that skill's potential. Left to her own devices, Horn would potentially become the strongest adventurer who ever lived. The ability to raise her status based on her feelings with the potential for faster growth? She would be a fool to deny her the opportunity. After all, who best to guard Bell against any other hussies trying to get her otter? Freya let out an exhausted sigh. Very. Well, she relented. I'll let this plan of yours proceed. But do be warned. Your job is to seduce him. To steer him towards me. If you fall back to your murderous tendencies once more. She groped her breast, watching with little sympathy as Horn twitched from the pleasure. You will see what hell really feels like when I'm done with you. And so that was how Horn found herself dressed up like a dainty village girl, fully stocked with flowers and a picnic basket filled with Freya's homemade meals. As agreed, the opportunity to seduce Bell Cranel was hers for the taking, and so she followed her rabbit as he left his chapel with his party members. But as he and his party made their way to the dungeon, Horn intercepted them at the central fountain. Ignoring the sharp pang of jealousy that burst from her heart at the sight of Bell being surrounded by those hussies, she pulled out her concealed dagger from her dress and rushed towards him. Finally, she could finally be rid of these unwanted feelings in her heart. She could finally return to worshipping her goddess, and not this lustful rabbit. Sadly, one quick finger to Freya's divine womb sent that plan to the bottom of the ocean, and she stumbled into the arms of the person she both loved and despised, quivering and humping his thigh like a rutting dog. And not once had Freya ceased her ministrations, making sure to edge herself and build up the inevitable climax threatening to burst down her dam, and Horn prayed for forgiveness as she further entangled herself into Bell's body. She'd die of shame if she climaxed here in the middle of the street. As for the sinful rabbit himself, Bell was still utterly lost as the girl in his arms further increased her death grip on his body. Her barely restrained moans and heavy breathing made him more and more concerned for her well-being. He looked up to Well for any help, but the blacksmith was just as confused by the girl's actions as he was. Lily and Makoto, however, seemed to recognize the muffled cries from his assailant and wore both concerned and disgusted expressions on their faces. As the girl in his arms continued to writhe and moan, he decided that he had to disentangle themselves. He wasn't sure what was going on with her, but he couldn't just lay on the ground like that for the rest of the day. Miss? See, could you please let go of me? He asked kindly, but his voice only seemed to make her twitch and embrace him even tighter. When he failed to verbally persuade her to let go of him, he finally decided to use force. Squeezing his hands between their bodies, he gently but firmly pushed her off of him. Horn internally panicked as she felt his firm, warm hands press against her stomach, unintentionally heightening her pleasure as his hands were placed a few inches away from her sopping wet flower. She had to stop him before he broke down her gates. She couldn't lose herself here. And so she tightened her grip and forced herself to hug him even tighter, making sure she molded to his side. But Bell's luck ability decided to kick in at that very moment. Right as Horn pushed down to tighten the space between them, his hand had accidentally slipped due to how wet her dress was becoming, and it shot upward, from her stomach straight towards her chest. And when his fingers slipped over her breast and accidentally flicked one of her rising peaks, Horn's eyes widened in horror as her dam finally broke. It was a quiet morning in the streets of Oreo, as men and women of all races and sizes woke up to proceed with their daily lives. Grudgingly wiping the sleep from their eyes, they groaned as they prepared to start the new day. All sense of sleepiness was soon wiped from their minds as a loud voice echoed across the streets. Heads perked up. Everyone was shocked to hear what might have been the loudest feminine moan they had ever heard in their entire lives. No one was quite sure who caused it, or why someone decided to get it on so early in the morning. But some gods were quick to find out, and word began to spread. Soon, rumor turned to captivating story, and story quickly turned to legend. A familiar myth that would make even Zeus proud. The legend of how Bell Cranel, the record breaker, the little rookie, managed to shatter another record that very day by causing the city's largest and fastest orgasm ever witnessed. Women everywhere were entranced and charmed by his exploits, and men everywhere turned green with envy. Soon, the gods christened the day as the Great Moaning, and eagerly came up with several different titles for him should he level up, many a favorite including titles such as Mr. Casanova, Breeding Bunny, Horny Hair, and Harem Protagonist, just to name a few. much to the anger of a certain goddess of the hearth. Of course, one Freya Familia member would viciously deny the events that had happened that day, and would threaten to castrate anyone who spread word of what happened, including her involvement, but no one really cared. Sequestered in a nearby alley and hidden by the shade were a group of 8 first-class adventurers, all of whom wore various looks of disgust and pity on their faces as they watched a member of their familia unravel and let out a loud orgasmic moan that caught the attention of everyone in the vicinity, if not the entire city. For once, Hogni was at a loss for words. No amount of chunny garbage he could voice out would ever convey the immense second-hand embarrassment he felt as he watched Horn devolve into a twitching, sobbing mess as she fell face-first into Bell Cranel's chest, her white dress now completely soaked in her juices. Hayden glared so viciously that his glasses cracked and shattered, a slew of barely restrained curses passing through his lips. The Gulliver brothers wanted to turn away from the abhorrent sight in front of them, but like a collision between 2 carts at high speeds, they couldn't help but watch with morbid curiosity. Alan just wanted to throw up, run away, and for once take a leaf out of his sister's book by settling in for a long catnap. Otter sighed and respectfully turned his gaze away, pretending not to see his fellow familia member relieve herself in public. Well, I never thought I'd ever feel sorry for Horn until now. Hogni muttered. Filthy whore, lustful piece of trash. How dare she tarnish Lady Freya's reputation, letting such obscene garbage spew from her mouth? Has she no shame? Hayden muttered darkly. Damn, didn't know Horn had it in her. But did she really have to flick the bean in the middle of the street like that? Well, she always was a bit of a closet pervert. I don't think this really qualifies her as a closet pervert anymore. Each of the Gulliver brothers let out an exasperated sigh, shaking their heads in dismay. Fuck this, I'm out of here. Alan spat out. I need a drink. Otter didn't have the heart to order him to stay, only closing his eyes as he gave a quick prayer to Freya for her forgiveness. Freya Familia's reputation would take a hit once word got out that one of their members orgasmed in public. No doubt Ganesha Familia would try to slap a fine on Horn for indecent public exposure, but that wasn't his concern for now. Their main job was to ensure that Horn didn't have any murderous ideas for her date, but it seemed that Lady Freya had taken care of that problem without their assistance. Regardless of the embarrassing hiccup, Phase 1 of the operation was a success. Now for the most difficult part of the plan, having Horn ask Bell Cranel out on a date and eventually seduce him to Lady Freya's side. Somehow, Otter wasn't too excited about the odds of her success. Horn let out several shaky breaths, her entire body twitching from the severe aftershocks of her orgasm as she squirmed on top of Bell Cranel, who remained as motionless as a statue while his party members were too disgusted by her to even dare stay within a few feet from her. Ignoring how she utterly soaked her dress and Bell's pants with her sparkling nectar, she unsteadily rolled herself off of Bell and lay on the ground next to him, her entire murder/seduction plan forgotten as she caught her breath. It wasn't until a couple minutes later that she finally understood the gravity of the situation. Raising herself from the ground, she turned beet red as hundreds of people gathered around them, blushing up a storm or wolf whistling in her direction. Several gods had started to gossip amongst themselves, eager to spread the news. Bell remained as motionless as ever, his body completely pale while the rest of his blood shot to his head. He wore a shocked expression on his face that remained frozen as he utterly failed to process the sight of a woman climaxing on top of him. Welf and Makoto weren't much better, their faces as red as Welf's hair as they tried to look anywhere else but the two of them, squirming on the spot. And Lily? Though her face was just as red, her face wore a look of bloody murder, her entire body vibrating in place as a literal volcano finally erupted from her throat. What the fuck? The 5 of them could only stare at each other in immense embarrassment and barely restrained fury as they sat outside a local bath. Having showered and dressed themselves in new clothes, Horn and Bell could only cast a quick glance at the other before turning away just as suddenly, faces redder than tomatoes. Horn had never felt more embarrassed and ashamed in her entire life. She had just orgasmed in public, and loudly too. She had debased herself in front of a crowd of hundreds. Gods have seen her give Bell a sprinkling shower, and now everyone will know that Horn, Nameless, the ever-devoted attendant of Freya herself, had jizzed all over Little Rook like an Amazonas laced with 100 aphrodisiacs. There was no doubt now that her alias will change from Nameless to Shameless now. Grr. Damn you, Bell Cranel. Horn quickly restrained her murderous feelings for the sinful rabbit in front of her, lest she earn Freya's ire once more. Taking several deep breaths to calm herself, she decided to avoid staring at him entirely and focus on the rest of his party, who were none too pleased with her presence. Lily was the first to break the ice. Okay, can someone explain to Lily what the hell just happened at the fountain? Why you CCC climaxed on top of Master Bell, she exclaimed with a red face. Bell let out an eep, and furiously blushed, mimicking the actions of Welf and the others at Lily's words. Horn wasn't much better, but she fought down her sense of shame and stared at the prum with a heated glare. You will forget everything that has happened in the past few hours. What had happened was a freak of nature, a maelstrom of bad luck, a distortion in the space-time continuum. Huh. Anyways, purge this incident from your mind altogether. It was nothing more than a fever dream, and one not of my own volition. But you will forget everything. Horn's glare had turned so bloodthirsty that even Lily was forced to back down, and frankly no one was willing to remember the events that had happened earlier. Well, except for Bell, but that's a topic for another day. Giving a light cough, Bell fought down the blush on his cheeks and tried to give a welcoming smile. Well then, may I ask what's your name? Horn. Lily's eyes shot open. Wait a minute. Horn, as in Nameless. Master Bell, she's from Freya Familia. Somebody kill me now. Horn bemoaned on the inside. Now there's no way they'll ever forget what happened. Bell's attention was thankfully grabbed by the mention of her familia. Freya Familia. The one that reigns as the top of Oreo alongside Loki Familia. What do you need from me? Bell and the others were then surprised to see Horn suddenly turn shy, her cheeks a brilliant scarlet as she twiddled her fingers together. Cursing herself silently, she swallowed heavily before turning to Bell, smoke practically coming out of her ears. Be Bell Cranel. Eep. Why yes. Go out with me. She muttered quietly. I'm sorry. Stupid rabbit. Horn grabbed his collar and shoved their faces closer together, their lips only a few centimeters apart. Go out on a date with me. Iki. Meanwhile, at a certain pub, Ryu kicked out a familiar customer onto the streets, her cheeks dyed red from his comments once again. For the last time, sir. If you continue to harass the staff, then we have no choice but to kick you out. Be but my novel. I need to see more of your luscious thighs. Umph. A punch to the face by Mamma Mia herself sent him flying across the streets. Go be a pervert somewhere else, idiot. Sheesh, we always get the weirdos here. Mia cursed as she turned around. All right, quit your lollygagging and get back to work. Yes. The other ladies groaned. Ryu was just about to follow them inside when a sudden jolt of electricity raced down her spine. Exclamation point. What's up with you, Naya? Anya asked. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that Mr. Cranel's chastity is in danger. Huh. Wait, where are you going? Lunwar yelled as Ryu suddenly took off into the streets. No time to explain. I must protect Mr. Cranel's virginity. F for seer, of course. She hastily replied with a red face, before dashing off into the sunset. This dumb elf. What is she even going on about, Naya? And at the same time, two other elves would soon begin their journey to hunt down and feast on their delectable rabbit. Author note. Holy shit. Not gonna lie, this was by far the most difficult story I have ever written today. After all, this was originally supposed to be a one-shot crack FIC, and now I had to expand it into a full story. I wasn't lying when I said that I suck at writing comedy, and the reason why this next chapter took so long was because I tried my hardest to write something entertaining for you guys. I deleted and restarted 15 different drafts for this chapter, and the one you're reading right now had to be cut and edited multiple times before I was satisfied. I do hope that you guys found some enjoyment from this chapter, as honestly I'm still not happy with how it turned out. I'd appreciate any feedback or suggestions you guys have, as well as any recommendations for fics that are comedic in nature for inspiration. Don't want to make the humor go stale. Thank you as always for your patience and for your love for this crazy drug trip of a story, LOL. Have a happy Halloween, everyone. Please be safe out there.